What would a 49ers first week game look like without injuries? I've got Dr. Nirav Pandya here. I'm going to be talking about all of the injuries, asking him his expert opinion, and we're going to talk about timelines, what to expect. Stick around right after this. Welcome, everybody. Let's go Niners. My name is Jason Aponte. I'm Jason Aponte. That's Dr. Nirav Pandya. We are going to be talking 49ers injuries. Doc, before we get into any of that, how's it going?
Doing well. Excited for football to start. It's that time of year. Things got to get going. Yeah.
Which jersey's in the cart, Doc? Let me know.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a Pearsall. Got to get a Pearsall jersey.
All right.
Gotta show respect to the man who's very lucky. Yeah.
You know what? I think that's a really, really good place to start, right? Because obviously Ricky Pearsall has an injury that has you not thinking about football at all. Unfortunate situation. But in terms of what Kyle Shanahan said yesterday about where the gunshot wound was, and it came out and it didn't touch anything, Kyle said this, and he's not a doctor, so I'm just going to repeat what he said. But he said if there's 100 cases like that, only 2 would go that way. Doc, I mean, obviously we're all elated that, Ricky's fine, but doesn't that seem like something that is really, really out of the norm for a gunshot wound of that nature in that spot?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is really a miracle that he got away with obviously no injury to his organs. And, even if you kind of miss the organs, you didn't hit a bone or a ligament or anything like that. So it's very, very rare. I mean, one of the things we always train for, when we're doing trauma rotations is when you get a gunshot wound in the chest, that's bad news. You're worried about saving someone's life, and for him to be walking around and talking about going to the weight room the next day, I mean, it's pretty crazy. So,
and he could play Monday, he said.
Exactly. Yeah. So, pretty remarkable. And yeah, you can imagine, like if you miss the vital organs, miss the bones, and the bullet just goes out. I mean, it's theoretically possible, and I've seen that before, but just really remarkable because most of the time that ends up with something very, very negative happening to someone. And it's amazing. We're talking about when's he going to return to play as opposed to how has his life changed.
Yeah. And I think, again, that injury, football should be the last thing you're thinking of, right? But when you hear the story of Kyle talking about it and him saying, yeah, I should be ready to go Monday, it's just, this is a moment that it feels like a large part of the offseason was very negative with contract talks and whatever, and the discussions of Super Bowl hangover and can they do it again and what's going to happen with salary cap, that it almost feels like this horrific situation can be a galvanizing moment for this roster. And it can be something that this team can rally around. I mean, you heard Trent Williams say, I literally wanted to come back to help lead this team because of him, man. So it's like, I'm not trying to paint this as like some sort of good thing because it's obviously not, but it could turn out to be something that the 49ers kind of rally around, which, you really can't be too upset with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people, particularly athletes, they rally, they find strength in tragedy sometimes, luckily for Pearsall, he's fine. And it sounds like everything's gonna be fine and playing in a couple of weeks. But I do agree that when you look at it purely from a sports perspective, I was a little worried going into the season. You got the contract issues, Brandon's, not signing, Trent didn't sign. There's a lot of things going on, and I'll talk about the Super Bowl and what happened with overtime, and then something like this happens, and one of the players that has, from all everything, all the reports, has been just a workhorse in practice and wants to do all the right things. Your first number one worried, what happened? Is he going to live? And the next thing you know, he's like talking to you, and then he's back on the practice field. So I think it may just take all that kind of noise out of the way and be like, look, we're a team. We've got one of our players out here who survived this horrible thing. Let's go out there and play football. It's one of those things you can gather strength in.
Yeah, absolutely. And pivoting away from that, let's talk about Christian McCaffrey, because look, I've been on the train with 49ers fans and saying, even if Christian McCaffrey was fully healthy, you probably weren't going to see him much, and for good reason. Now it's a calf injury. Okay, so now you're not going to see him, right? But I think particularly 49ers fans in the Bay Area, when you hear calf and then you hear Achilles, what's the first guy's name that jumps into your mind, Doc?
You got Kevin Durant. Yep.
Yeah. So Kyle says calf Achilles, nothing new. This is what it's been. I think we all understand that the calf is tied to the Achilles, but in what cases does this become something where you can't even really press him, or essentially, I guess the question I'm asking is, what's the real worry in terms of this? Because when the word Achilles is like a fire alarm. So maybe you can help us and keep us a little bit calm. Although today it said it came out that McCaffrey looked like a full go and he looked fine today. But Doc, calf Achilles going into week 1 doesn't sound good for 49ers fans or fantasy football players for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I almost wonder if it's a little bit more semantics. Like they listed it as a calf injury, and then Kyle said, calf Achilles. I mean, honestly, with a lot of these things, as we all know, the calf and Achilles, they kind of join. It's very close together. And I wouldn't have been surprised if like 4 or 5 weeks ago when he quote unquote hurt his calf, they're like, oh, he strains, a little bit of pain down in the Achilles. So I'm not super concerned about it. Kyle didn't make it seem like it's something new that popped up over the next past couple weeks. Where you get worried for players who have calf issues for getting an Achilles issue is when it is more chronic. And luckily for McCaffrey, obviously he's had a lot of injuries, but he hasn't had many calf injuries. So I think more than anything else, it's something they nipped in the bud early in the season. He took a significant amount of time off. Where you get worried with these is if they happen in the middle of the season and you can't tell McCaffrey, hey, you're going to sit for 5 weeks, because it usually feels good in a week or two. And then what you worry about is, okay, you sit for a week, then you come back, it gets a little sore, and then that tendon starts breaking down. Because it's early in the season, he's a full go. I'm not super worried about it. But once again, if it starts to creep up again, game 3, game 4, then you start getting a little bit more worried about it. But hopefully this is just one of those training camp things. They're being extra cautious and he's going to be okay.
Whew, man, I feel way better hearing that now. Now, I guess another question, and this isn't injury related at all because neither player is injured, but Trent Williams and Brandon Aiyuk haven't done football activities. And I spoke to a former player who said training camp is, obviously for installing, but it's for getting your body ready and taking hits so you can start to go into January. I think the biggest concern for any 49er fan, if they try to go full go on Monday, is soft tissue injury, something like that. What are the chances of something like that without, much football contact or training camp time?
I think I worry a lot for someone like Brandon Aiyuk, just given the position that he plays. Whenever you're playing a position wide receiver, I mean, you can do things on the side, you can do sprints, you can work out, but the fact that you're essentially running a track meet in a game, you're going 45, 50 plays, you're running full speed, you're taking hits. It's hard to replicate that on your own, even if someone's throwing to you in the offseason, if even when he was working out. So I get a little bit more worried about, are they going to throw him in? Is he going to have that load? And are you going to get a hamstring? Are you going to get a quad? Are you going to get a calf? Because that's where it's going to happen. I worry less about Trent Williams, particularly because for him, he's not playing a speed position. He clearly has his timing down. For him, at his age, it's about limiting the amount of, kind of wear and tear he's taking during training camp. So as long as his timing's in place and he's not making any compensations because he's getting hit or he's tired, less worried about him. Hopefully both of them will kind of be a little bit on a snap count. You don't want them going out there and playing a whole bunch of plays. But once again, I worry more about Brandon Aiyuk, less so about Trent Williams.
Yeah, and I think, again, too, like Trent wouldn't be playing at all in training camp. It would never. He would have so many vet days and rest days, and I think it's more just get him to week 1 as well too. With Brandon Aiyuk, when you hear Kyle say, "What are the chances that he'll play 95, 98% of the snaps?" He says, "I'm not certain of that." Good news for the 49ers is they have a lot of other good players that they don't really have to tax him. It's okay. Maybe throw the ball to Deebo Samuel, maybe give it to Christian McCaffrey or George Kittle. You might be all right and get past that. One question that I have, and I think a lot of people have, is Talanoa Hufanga's recovery and the ACL thing. I think that now in modern sports medicine, it is more and more likely for a person to bounce back. I think it's less worry about will he be able to bounce back. I think that there's a lot of science, there's a lot of precedent. There's and we're in a place where now guys are bouncing back from things earlier than completely expected. And Hufanga was limited, during the week. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he is on track to play, but it doesn't exactly put him out. What sort of, I guess without knowing, the intricate details and everything, I want to make sure we say that. What's the essential timeline when it comes to ACLs and being able to just respond and come back and just be your old self?
Yeah. So if you look at, I think in general, we kind of break it up into like, when does the ACL heal and then how do you function, right? 2 separate things. So we know that right around 9 months, unless there's something bizarre going on, your ACL is healed structurally. But then there's tons of variability in terms of how does your knee respond when you're actually doing sports, right? I mean, you took 9 months off. So for a lineman, it's going to respond differently than a linebacker, than a safety, than a wide receiver. So that's where I think it's really hard to predict when people are going to come back. One player can come back and start cutting, do agility, do contact work, and their knee feels great. Some people may take a little bit longer time. And then you throw in the mental component as well too. Like, are you confident in your knee? Are you going to be able to play very aggressively? So that's why I think for a lot of people, when they look at statistics coming off an ACL, and Adrian Peterson aside, who is like a huge kind of outlier,
complete freak,
yeah, it's that second season, because you got that full season, you got your timing back. So yeah, do some players come back and do they play well? Absolutely. But if you talk to players who've had their ACLs done, whether professional athletes or college athletes, it's not until month 18, that second season, where they feel confident. So I think for a lot of fans, yes, a player could be coming back, they seem to be okay, but they're really not feeling themselves until 18 to 24 months after surgery, because it just takes that long to get used to playing sports. Like, you imagine you took a year off for no other reason, you didn't have an ACL, it's going to take you a while to get back to playing at a professional level. So I think that's where the variability comes in for various players.
What's the weird part about this is Hufanga is essentially in a contract year. So now, depending on how he plays is going to be how the 49ers view him. And I think, that's one of the unfortunate downsides of sports is, things happen, things pop up. That's why kind of, when people say, well, he's out of the league, why is it? It's like different circumstances are not that Hufanga is going to be out of the league. I'm just saying, like, when people are like, why hasn't anybody signed this player? You don't know what's going on, right? Like, there's a lot of other things that are going on. So, again, we hope for a speedy recovery. And if not, George Odom is probably locked and loaded to replace him. I wanted to talk to you about one of the 49ers rookies, not Ricky Pearsall, who's been dealing with a few injuries, hamstring first, and then tweaked the groin, but he did flash in the Raiders game. Isaac Guerrero. So Isaac Guerrero has this groin tweak, whatever it is that they're calling it. And that Raiders game feels like, I'll be honest, Doc, with all the news and everything, that feels like maybe 3 months ago. Like, it feels like that long. Yeah, long. But what would go into something like that, and what is the proper way to deal with it? Because I doubt he's going to play on Monday, but it's hamstring, groin. Is there anything to it, because he's kind of had this injury history in college as well too?
Yeah, I think, this is a fine line with athletes who are super explosive. I mean, you saw that run back that he had in the game. It's like, wow, this guy's fast, and it's kind of with Deebo as well too. I think that you take an athlete who's pushing their body to the limits, and what makes them great is his explosiveness, the ability to kind of go full speed and cut and pivot, which for a lot of players, what makes them great also is what leads to that injury risk. So I think for a lot of these players, what you're almost doing is telling them to kind of dial down a notch. You don't need to go 110%, maybe go 100%. Maybe try to protect your body. And it's hard for young players because they're getting in the league. They want to get that roster spot, as they talk about. But what ends up happening, you don't want to be that guy who's labeled as injury prone. So you dial it back a little bit, maybe decrease those reps. And then, when you're in those game situations, the coach is putting him in a situation where he's not going to injure himself again. So maybe you don't have him return kicks. Maybe you're having him do more controlled, running plays, things like that. So it's hard, especially if you've had that injury history, but it takes a matter of, okay, what's causing it? Is there some sort of mechanical issue in terms of how you run? If that's not the case, then maybe it's just dialing back. You don't have to go 110%. I use a Greg Maddux example for baseball. It's like, you don't have to throw fast. You just have to throw smart. So same sort of way with playing. Just find your spots, exert your body when you need to, but don't go 100% all the time.
100%. That's great. Thank you guys again for joining this, talking with Dr. Nirav Pandya about the 49ers injury updates. If you guys haven't heard, I think we're fine with Christian McCaffrey. We're gonna find a way to get by this. I feel much better about it. But I wanted to ask you about Aaron Banks, who missed a lot of time with a finger. Now, obviously, offensive linemen need their hands, and it does sound like Aaron Banks is going to play week 1 against a stout defensive line with the Jets. Quentin Williams kicks inside and everything as well too. Talk to me about how that finger can impact mobility or anything that Aaron Banks might have to deal with.
Yeah, especially with the way, they were so aggressive now with fixing his finger fractures, and people when they break them, because typically once you get that bone stabilized, or, you can essentially get back and play pretty quickly, especially at that position. So I think more than anything else, it's where you may be doing certain moves where you have to grab, or you have to kind of like quickly kind of, change position or change the way you're playing that can impact him. But the good news is for linemen, like, they can tape it, they can pad it. So typically we don't see it tremendously impact them, unless there's a little bit of a mental component of it, of like, I'm a little bit worried about if my grip strength is going to be the same, or if someone hits it, is it going to hurt? So that's really the thing we worry more about, is that usually these fingers are very structurally sound, but it's that repetitive impact. It gets thrown to the ground. Does that cause some discomfort, particularly when you get in cold weather? So I think in general he should be okay, especially when everything seems to be stable. But yeah, you do worry a little bit as the season goes on. Is that area going to be sore? Is it going to get more painful with repetitive injuries? But once again, usually we don't see people missing time repetitively with finger stuff, but can it sometimes impact play a little bit? Occasionally it can, particularly in that early first couple of games where they're coming back.
I have a question because the rookie rushing leader for the San Francisco 49ers, Elijah Mitchell, has dealt with many injuries.
Yeah.
And, the injury prone thing is like tossed around. I guess I don't even know what I'm asking about Elijah Mitchell at this point. And it just feels like it's obviously the young man is talented and he can play football. But are there certain guys that just their bodies are just not meant to play this game, and unfortunately that's just what it's going to be for like the rest of his career?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, there's a certain group of individuals, and it's nothing that they've done. But when we talk about injury prone, it's not like they're inherently like their ligaments and tendons are like prone to get injured. But the way they run, the way they cut, the way their joints work, like we're all different. Like you go when you're in first grade, everyone runs differently, right? So everyone's bodies are set up differently. So I think some people, just the way that they move, they're more prone to get soft tissue injuries. I think in Elijah Mitchell's case, I mean, we have a tendency to think like, oh, an MCL is not a big deal. It's just another injury, everyone, like you mentioned, everyone gets back. For some players, once you get that first traumatic injury, then everything gets thrown off. Like you just don't get back to being yourself. So you get one MCL, then you get another MCL, then you get a hamstring, and it's just like this period of injuries one after another. And I think a lot of it, particularly in football, is that, as you mentioned, if they're not back, then someone else is going to take that roster spot. So then you're suddenly maybe pushing yourself more than you should, and you get that other injury, and you push yourself again. So I feel horrible for him. He's like extremely talented. When he's healthy, he looks great. But I think once you get that one injury, then everything else gets thrown out of alignment, and then you're just dealing with one after another. Hopefully he heals and gets back, but you worry about him because he's had 2 knee injuries, now this hamstring, and it's hard at that position to come back from those.
Speaking with Dr. Nirav Pandya about the 49ers injuries, I mean, they don't really have too many. When you look at this, you couldn't really ask for a better start, at this point. Obviously, Feliciano's on the IR, who was a vital part of the offensive line last year. But from all indications, Dominic Puni is ready to step in at right guard, and I think that's an interesting development. I wanted to ask you about Brock Purdy and his progress after the injury, right? So when we spoke last season, we were cautiously optimistic because we didn't know how things were going to bounce back, right? And Tommy John gets thrown around, and you start to think about baseball players. Yeah, they're fine. How does this deal with the football, aspect of it? Were you not blown away by what Brock Purdy was able to do last year just off of that injury?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for 2 things. One is he came back, I think, a lot earlier than I think a lot of people expected. I think people were thinking maybe it'll be week 3, week 4, just based on other, using baseball data over to football. So I think that was amazing. Number 2 is I was just surprised that it held up to contact, right? Like with baseball players, it's the velocity, but we just don't have good track records for how people will do if they're constantly getting hit. I mean, he didn't even miss any time because his elbow was bothering him, which is pretty remarkable. And then third, I mean, his performance. I mean, he looked great. I mean, if you really look at Purdy's career, it's pretty wild. I mean, last pick in the draft, take over as a rookie, tear your UCL, come to the Super Bowl. Like it's just crazy what he's done. So I think I was just blown away at how he did. We're well past the time point where we're worried about this being an issue. It's healed now, right? So if there's going to be another issue, it's going to be another freak injury. It's not going to be because, this is acting up again. So yeah, I think all of us didn't know kind of how to expect it would go. And he far exceeded what I think anyone would have thought for a quarterback coming off that injury, especially in a short time frame.
Is there any chance that possibly, and this is me just being, again, optimistic, his arm gets stronger with another year of all of this, or will it just go back to the normal strength that he had before the injury?
I think it's absolutely a possibility it'll get stronger. And I think what people, sometimes think about, after Tommy John or any kind of surgery is that it's a surgery that does it. But actually, what it causes you to do is do physical therapy, look at your mechanics. And, there's all this talk about Purdy kind of like rehabbing, getting his strength back. And, probably never had to do that. And suddenly he's doing these things and noticing, hey, I can throw a little bit more efficiently, I'm getting stronger. Let me keep doing these things. So a lot of times it may not necessarily be that surgery, but he continues to build that strength up. And even you see his lower body, like he's just so much stronger. I think that you could see a Purdy who's stronger coming off this elbow injury than he was before, just by the nature that it made him work on stuff that you never would work on unless you had to go through that process.
All right. we've talked enough about injuries. I've got to put your feet to the fire now at this point. So there was a quote that came out. I forget who was it that said on 95.7 The Game that they would rather have Brock Purdy than Lamar Jackson. Look, again, I'm not. Yeah, I guess that's who it is. Again, I'm not in tune with the West Coast, right? Like, I'm on the East Coast. This is not an injury question. This is not an injury question. Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP. Brock Purdy, Super Bowl, NFC Championship. What are your thoughts on that comment, and what do you think?
Well, I think of football as we talked about as a violent game, and I think that Lamar Jackson is an extremely talented, but you worry the way he plays that he's going to get injured, and then he's not going to be there. The best is being available. With Purdy, yes, he runs around, but I think the risk of him getting injured and not being there is so much less. So, does Lamar Jackson have the raw talent that is more than Brock Purdy? Absolutely. I don't think anyone would question that. But for what Kyle Shanahan's system is, the fact that Purdy can hopefully have less of an injury risk than Lamar Jackson, I would take Purdy. He fits well with the offense. You have all these weapons, right? You got McCaffrey, you got Kittle, you've got Debo, you've got Aiyuk. You don't need a quarterback who's going to go out and create all this offense. You need a quarterback who can get the ball to those playmakers and preserve himself. So I think for the system, I know Brock Purdy's not a system quarterback, but for the system that they run, I think that Brock Purdy's perfect for it. And if you put Lamar Jackson in it, I think you'd be wasting what you have around you, and you potentially may not have him for the season the way he plays.
And what's funny is if Twitter or X or whatever the people call, I will never call it X, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if Twitter was around during Joe Montana's time, what would they be saying? Oh, he just throws the ball to Jerry Rice and Roger Craig, and he just, and he gets, it's just the quarterback discourse has gotten to a point where people believe that nobody needs help. Right. Nobody needs structure. Nobody needs system. Nobody needs, other players around them. It's like Patrick Mahomes is throwing to himself, right? Like, right. or and calling the plays himself. That's the part of this discourse that is the funniest to me. And I believe wholeheartedly that Lamar Jackson is an electric player, somebody who is, and I voted for him at MVP. Sorry guys, like I know you guys don't want to hear that, but again, you're talking about Lamar having to throw the ball 42 times, run for 16 more times. That's not good at what you want to do. Like, the idea is to keep Lamar limited in ways where his playmaking can win you a moment, but you don't want to rely on that. You need other guys, and that's what you kind of saw with last night. Talking about the football game last night.
Yeah, you can't in football. Like in basketball, you can have maybe one or two players carry you, but you just can't in football. And then if you're relying, you just don't see in the history of the NFL, oh, this team rode this one player. Like even with the Brady, like you had a coach, you had a Belichick, you had players. So it absolutely, you can't have one person leading the team like that. And Brock Purdy's the perfect fit for the 49ers, and he's talented too.
Yes, 100%. You always have to say that because it always sounds like a backhanded compliment, almost like when you just say that he's perfect for the system. Oh, well, no, nobody can just walk in here and operate the system the way that Brock has. And thank you, Tony, a channel member. Thank you, Jay and Dr. Pandya. This has been a good one, Doc, but I can't let you go. I'm gonna end here, but I can't let you go. So we start talking a little bit Warriors.
Yeah. So
I'm a Warriors. What is it like? I guess sympathizer, enthusiast now, and right. What Steph Curry just did in the Olympics is something that I'll never forget. And the greatest basketball game I've ever been to was the day before the Super Bowl against the Phoenix Suns. And Steph Curry grabs the ball from half court, just throws it up and drills it, and they win the game. Talk to me about why do I feel like they are trying to waste the last good few years of Steph Curry by not adding other people and helping him?
Yeah, I think it's all Warriors fans are a little frustrated, particularly with them valuing certain younger players or not willing to give them up in trades. I think that really the organization believes that these young players, the Kumingas, the Podziemskis, the Trace Jackson Davis, they're better than any free agent that's out there. And, as opposed to bringing in a big name person. So, could this work out great where some of these players take a great leap and Curry is going to, get another championship? That would be awesome. But I do think, we talk about two timelines. I think they're hoping maybe that these guys take a jump. They don't have to pay someone, and Curry will just do his magic. But it'll be interesting to see. The season can either go really well or really bad. And what I don't want to have happen, it goes really bad, and then Curry's talking about, maybe I can go somewhere else next year. Which would be, I don't know. I know he's got his extensions and stuff, but if Curry wants to trade, they're going to trade him, you know? So I hope that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Doc, one last question. And again, I am a newly, Warriors enthusiast.
Yeah.
But my mind starts to race and wander about the idea of LeBron and Steph just joining up at the end of their time, just because LeBron looks so happy being able to have Curry work off the ball and be able to get him the ball, and he knows that it's a knockdown shooter. I'll be honest, that's all I really want now for Steph for the rest of his time. It's like I just want to see that like one last time. Like and let me just preface this because I know a lot of Warriors fans don't want to hear this. I hope it happens with the Warriors and it doesn't happen with the Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Warriors, Lakers fans, it's big beef there, but I think just sort of mean for NBA history to see LeBron and Steph play together. You saw how they were working together in the Olympics. I mean, I'm a fan of just good basketball, yes. And I think at the end of the day, we're spoiled in the Bay. We've won 4 championships, over the past, like we can't complain, and seeing LeBron and Steph together purely from a basketball perspective, I think would just be remarkable. So, yeah.
That's it. That's all I'm talking about. I just want to see NBA history because both those guys are still at the very high at the top of their games, man. And it just, again, LeBron and Steph, they just looked happy together and they would be a perfect fit because LeBron wants to pass. Steph is a knockdown shooter, man. I just think it would be electric. But again, I want to reiterate, I want this to happen on the Warriors, and not happen
not the Lakers,
right?
not the Lakers.
Yeah, not the Lakers. Doc, thank you so much for your time. Tell everybody where they can find you and they can find all your work and everything as well, Doc.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm a 95.7 The Game once a week on Tuesdays, 4 p.m. Pacific time, talking about injuries. Then you can follow me on Twitter. Still going to call it Twitter, at Dr. Nirav Pandya. Follow me on there. Got a lot of injury updates and some sports fandom as well too. So check it out.
100%. Thank you again, Doc. And again, if you're not following him for the injury updates, it'll give you a lot of clarity and allow you to not hyperventilate as much. So I implore you guys to, go find him and everything. And for you guys in the Bay Area, 95.7 The Game, he's always on there. So thank you again, Doc. Thank you guys for joining. This is going to be a short one. I'm going to let you guys get back to your football. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel. We got a lot of content coming. 49ers play football on Monday. So I think Brock Purdy jersey in the cart, Doc. I think it's time.
Yeah, absolutely.
For Dr. Nirav Pandya and Jay, we're out of here. As always, go Niners. Welcome, everybody. Let's go Niners. My name is Jason Aponte.